Hey, what's up YouTube? Welcome back to another video, Living the Dream Racing. Wanted to catch you up on where I'm at with stuff. When I last left you, we had taken and installed our valve train here on my 665-inch engine for my dragster. I'd gotten the rocker arms and everything in place, but we hadn't adjusted the valves. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to take a look and adjust the valves and start getting this thing finished and put back together. I don't know if you see it too clearly or not. I'll unwrap it here in just a little bit, but I got my intake back from Induction Solutions with a brand new nitrous system on it. It's all nice and plumbed up. It's looking pretty sharp, and I'm anxious to be able to see how she does whenever this season starts up here. Right now, we're going to get started putting the front of the motor back together. I've got to get the water pump back on it. Got to get the oil pump pulley put back on. Found a small issue with it. It had come loose. The pulley had dry pulley for the oil pump had come loose, and as a result of that, it was moving around just a little bit. It didn't damage anything, not a big deal. We just had to put some new keyways in it and a couple more Allen screws that had come out. So we're going to get all that stuff back together today. We're going to get the valves run today. I'll show you running through the valves and try to get the intake bolted back on, and that'll take care of the rest of today. So hope you enjoy the video. Make sure you guys are liking, sharing, and subscribing, and I'd really like to grow this channel. Let me know in the comments what you'd like to see and what I could do more and what I can do better. Thanks a lot, guys. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get the front of the engine put back together, and as we work through this, we'll get the whole top end put back together. I'll be showing you guys how to adjust the valves and all that stuff. So now my water pump, I use threaded rods on one side, and then I use bolts on the other. And one issue that I've had a little bit was the bolts coming loose. So we're going to address that while we're doing this. Big thing about it is that my fuel pump mounts on that side, and that's why I've got the studs. So the fuel pump bracket ties into the studs, and that's how I keep everything in place. Now before, I didn't have anything Loctited in place, but when I went to take this thing apart, what I found was that this thing had decided that it wanted to have some loose bolts. So we've got to address that just a little bit as we're going back together with this. Not really a big deal. The only other loose was the water pump bolts. But not forbidden maintenance, we don't want it to happen again. So we'll just go ahead and take some steps now to address that and make sure it's not an issue going forward. Engines like this, you know, even though it's pretty well balanced, it's still going to move around a little bit. And if things aren't nice and tight, then it's going to let you know. The big thing about it, though, is double checking everything. You know, pass after pass, run after run. Simply because these things, well, let's just say they don't get your attention if something isn't right. So we're going to make sure everything's nice and tight as we go back together. Everything is as it should be, and no, we don't have any issues. So, not a big deal. Kind of tedious, but that's okay. Now the one thing about this for my water pump is the hose goes through the belt on my vacuum pump. And that's simply just because of location. But it's not a biggie. We'll get that fixed and taken care of. That'll sit in there just like so. And what we're going to do, let me go ahead and take this. I got the wrench in here, I think I do. Might have it here. If not, I will change plans. Kind of discombobulated a little bit today. I'm going to take the vacuum pump belt off. And that'll make things a little bit easier. Trying to avoid that, but yeah, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Now I have to run spacers on this. Clear the gear drive. I actually don't have to run spacers on this one to clear the gear drive, but I had spacers on my previous setup. And I'm going to retain the spacers because I've got everything set up for the spacers. So it's just easier to keep it that way than to change everything around. And again, a little bit of blue Loctite on these guys. Keep them in check. Just to make sure that we don't have any issues. Now I have been asked why I run a water pump and a cooling system because I run on alcohol. Well, main reason is when I put this whole combo together, even before this version of it, I set this car up so that I could do everything by myself if I didn't have any help at the track, and it's worked. I generally do get help. I have some people that help me from time to time, and I have others that come out and help me, and sometimes even people there at the track will come by and help. But I never expect help, and I'm always pleased and glad to have it. I just never expect it. Some good people out there, both here and in Denver, and if you're ever out there racing, you know that sometimes you meet some people that you never really knew existed before until you get out to the racetrack, and you'll find out there's a lot of wonderful people out there. You got racers that are your bitter enemy when they're in the lane next to you, and they're your best friends when you're in the pits. And that's one of the things that I love the most about racing, is that, you know, you just meet such a great quality of people with so many common interests, and all we want to do is go fast, have fun, and then talk smack to each other. And we do, but you know, that's part of the competition, and that's part of the whole deal, is just everybody gets out there and does their thing, and you know, Some of us do better than others, and what have you, but you know, at the end of the day, you know, everybody's celebrating the trophies and the winnings, and everybody else is cheering them on. And you know, it's a fun thing. It really is. And I've had people ask me why I race, why I spend so much money doing this, and it's one of the things that I love to do. You know, it's just a passion. I got a passion for it when I was a really young kid, and it just never went away. But to be perfectly honest with you, some of the best people I've ever met in my life have been at the racetrack. You know, so I've got 2 places in my life that I've been, that I've met people that'll be my forever friends up until I breathe my last breath, and that was in the Marine Corps and at the racetrack. You know, so, and you know, some of those guys were Marines at the racetrack too. So shout out to my buddy Mo out there in North Carolina. He's the reason I have this car. Because of him, I'm able to race at this level. He helped me get going, helped me get started in it, and it's just been a steady progression. And you know, Mo's a great guy. I wish he could be here for this, but you know, he's doing his thing out there in North Carolina right now, and he's loving life. You know, he's retired now, and he's doing his thing and his hobbies, and we stay in touch, and that's just kind of how it is. So I'm gonna go ahead and break the video right here, get the rest of the front of the motor together, and then I'll show you once we get back onto the intake what I'm going to be doing up there, so I don't bore you too much. See you in a little bit. Okay, so got the front of the engine back together, and now we can go ahead and start concentrating on getting the valves adjusted so we can get this done and out of the way. And like I said before, I was going to wait until everything was done, put back together before I adjusted the valves. We're there now, so we're going to go ahead and bust this out. Now there's a few schools of thought on adjusting the valves, and I wanted to talk to you about that. The 3 basic methods are the 2-position method, the 90-degree method, and the exhaust opening intake closing method. Now the first one, the 2-position method, what that involves is you set the crank at TDC, and it'll be on either number 1 or its companion cylinder, and that is typically used for inline 6-cylinder engines like the big diesels. Why is it relevant here? Well, just in case you hear somebody mention it, what'll happen there though is you set it on TDC number 1 generally, or TDC number 6. As long as you're on top dead compression or top dead center compression stroke on either 1 or 6, you'll be able to adjust any of the valves in the particular order that they go. But position 1, you get it up to TDC compression stroke, you find out if you're on cylinder number 6 or if you're on cylinder number 1, and then you're going to adjust the valves on the cylinder that's on TDC compression stroke, either 1 or 6, and then you'll adjust an intake valve on one cylinder, an exhaust valve on another, and you'll go through in the order that the manufacturer describes until you've adjusted all of the valves for that position. And then you'll turn the crank 360 degrees back up to TDC, and then you'll adjust the remaining valves, because that'll put the other companion cylinder on top dead center compression, and then it'll allow you to go back through and adjust the rest of the valves that you didn't adjust before. Now, as far as working on a V8, I'm not so sure about that. Never tried it on a V8. I don't know anybody that has, so I'm not going to say if it'll work or not. Another method that you'll find that's very commonly used, some of the manufacturers even imply this, is the 90-degree method. Now on a V8, the 90-degree method, what you do is you typically start with the number 1 cylinder. You don't have to start with that one. You just need to remember the firing order that you're dealing with. But you put it at TDC compression stroke on that cylinder. Well, we'll go ahead and just say it's number 1 for the sake of discussion. So you bring the engine up, TDC compression number 1. It's going to be 0 on the balancer. It's going to be right up aligned with the timing mark. And you're going to go ahead and you're going to adjust both valves on that number 1 cylinder. Then what you're going to do is you're going to turn the crank 90 degrees. You're going to line up the 90-degree mark on the damper with the timing pointer, and you're going to go to the next cylinder in the firing order and adjust that. And then you're going to turn it 90 more degrees to the 180-degree mark on the balancer, adjust the next cylinder in the firing order, and so on until you've completed all of your valve adjustments. That works for the majority of engines out there, and it's fairly accurate. But there is a problem with it. Depending upon your camshaft profile, where the cam's installed at, and a particular engine that you're working on, it may not be exactly accurate. In order to get a proper valve adjustment, your valves need to be on the base circle of the cam. The base circle of the cam is where you're on the bottom of the lobe, there's no lift or anything, you're not on a lash ramp or anything like that. You need to be on the base circle. And like I said, depending upon the camshaft, where it's installed at in your particular engine, that 90-degree method may not work. Now, the most accurate way, on a V8 at least, to adjust the valves doesn't care about the camshaft, doesn't matter about the camshaft, doesn't matter where it's installed at, doesn't matter about the engine configuration, is the exhaust opening intake closing method. That's the method that I use and the method that I'll show you here. Now again, it does not matter what cylinder you start on. You just need to pick a cylinder. I generally start at either the back of the head or the front of the head and work my way all the way down, and then I'll go to the next head and I'll just continue either at the back or the front and work my way across. So what I'll do is I'll bar the engine over by hand and I'll watch the rocker arms on a particular cylinder. For example, this is cylinder number 2. I may go ahead and watch the rocker arms there. And I'll start barring it over until I see one of the rocker arms move. Here's the kicker to this. It does not need to be just the intake moving first or just the exhaust moving first. It can be either one. Okay? I'm going to watch to see if there's one of those rockers move. Now what I'm watching for is to see which one moves first and where it's at. Now if you'll look at number 2 right here, I'll see if I can move this down a little bit and hopefully you can see this a little bit better. I'll try to move this over. Pardon my videoing skills, they suck, but we'll get it there. So if you'll see, in cylinder number 2 right here, the exhaust valve is open. That means the intake valve is on its lash ramp. Okay? But the problem is the exhaust is almost all the way open. I want to adjust the intake when the exhaust valve just begins to open. So this one has actually gone too far. So what I'll do is I'll continue to bar the engine over in its direction of rotation, and I'll watch the intake valve on cylinder number 2. Never go backwards on your valve adjustments. Do not back the engine up. Always go in the direction of rotation. So again, I'm going to bar this over in the direction of rotation, and I'm going to watch the number 2 intake rocker. What I'm watching for is for that intake rocker to open all the way and then just begin to close. And then when it just begins to close, I'll come and adjust my exhaust. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to bar this over and I'm going to watch my rockers there. And I still got the spark plugs in this thing to keep crap out of the engine, so I got to fight the compression a little bit. You notice the exhaust rocker's closing. Okay, now the intake rocker on number 2 is beginning to open. Okay, so I'm going to watch that rocker arm. All right, that rocker arm is fully open. Now it's just beginning to close. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over and I'm going to adjust my exhaust rocker. Now on this particular engine, it calls for 20 thousandths of an inch lash on both the intake and the exhaust. Okay, that is a hot setting. This is cold, so what I got to do is I got to kind of compensate for that. Now the rule of thumb that you need to follow here: aluminum heads with a cast iron block, you allow approximately 6 thousandths of an inch growth. So if my valve spec, adjustment spec is 20 thousandths hot, my cold adjustment, allowing for 6 thousandths, would be about 14 thousandths cold. Okay? Now it's a little bit different with an iron block or with an aluminum block and aluminum heads. They grow a lot more. So if my spec is 20 thousandths on this, which it is 20 thousandths, okay, I have an aluminum block and aluminum heads, that means my growth is going to be roughly about 12 thousandths of an inch. So I'd probably want to set these guys at about 8 thousandths of an inch when it's cold like it is right now. That's going to allow for growth, and when this engine gets hot, the valve lash should be right almost on spec. The issue that I run into is right now the temperature in here is about 60 degrees, give or take, and that cold spec that I'm giving you, the 8 thousandths cold, is going to be a little bit too loose on this engine because of the temperature. You're looking at a cold spec there on a normal day, say 75, 78 degrees or something like that. So it's a little colder in here. So what I do is I run these down to about 6 thousandths of an inch, about 2 thousandths tighter. And when this engine's fully up to operating temperature, what I found on this particular combo is that about 6 thousandths at this temperature results in about 20 thousandths at the valve when it's hot. Now the tool that I use to do this is an LSM. It's a torque wrench designed just for adjusting the valve train. Allen wrench goes through it. It's got a provision for a socket. Now this torque wrench is calibrated. Okay, it torques these to 20 foot-pounds. Now I've seen people torque these down with a wrench and just crank on them and crank on them and crank on them. Well, that's not a good thing. These have a torque value and you want to follow it. On aluminum rockers, if you over torque them, you can damage the rocker arm and it'll break. And then you end up with a catastrophic valve train failure. On a steel rocker arm, you can damage the threads on the adjusting screw. And same thing happens. It'll screw up your adjustment, and it can also cause problems with your valve train. So you want to try to keep your adjustment, your torque setting consistent. So what I do is I got just a little bit of tension on the nut, and I'm going to go till I got a kind of a tight drag on that. And the reason I do that is because when I go to torque, that's going to pull that just a little bit. And there we go. I got my 6 thousandths. This is a nice firm 6 thousandths. Whenever you go to torque a fastener, it's going to pull those threads together and it's going to change your clearance. So if I'm just a little bit on the tight side right here before I torque them, after I torque them, it's going to be just about perfect. And this one right here, for what I want, it's just about there. It might be just a smidgen tight, so we'll go ahead and back it up just a bit and recheck it. And there we go. And all I did was I loosened it, I moved this back just a little bit, and I tightened it up. So that one right there is good to go. So what I'm going to do now, fun thing about this is I can leave that there, it's not really in the way. I'm going to go ahead and finish barring the engine over, and I'm going to watch that exhaust rocker. It's adjusted. I need to adjust the intake now. I'm going to go ahead and keep barring this thing over. Now number 2 there is going through compression stroke. Here shortly, it's going to go through its exhaust stroke. Okay, now I don't know if you caught that or not, but it is moving just a little bit. Okay, so now it is just starting to open, so now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to adjust my intake. Now, like I said before, when I took these off, I was going to put them back on, and they don't change much, and that's pretty close as is. I'm not going to change it much, that's just a little bit too much. Back it up just a bit. A little bit more. And all I'm doing here, I'm just loosening the nut just enough to move the Allen wrench. And I'm backing the Allen off just a little bit. And I'm retorquing the nut. What that's doing is it's giving me just a fraction of a thousandth at a time. So eventually, my adjustment's going to be where I want it. Almost there. And we are there. We'll go ahead and torque it one more time. Double check it. And we are there. And that's the proper way to adjust lash. Now what I'll do is I'll go through the rest of the valves, go ahead and get those adjusted, and then once I got that done, I'll come right back to you. Alright, so we're back. We got all the valves adjusted, rechecked everything, got everything torqued, so now we're ready to throw the intake on. The biggest issue I have with the intake is my cam sync sensor. And that goes in place of the distributor, and the issue that I have is I have to install it in the intake before I put the intake on the engine. Otherwise, I can't get it into the intake. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to go ahead and grab that, and I'm going to get the intake set in place. If you'll notice on the gaskets, I got a little bit of silicone around each one of them. I'm reusing the intake gaskets. They're a little hard right now. So this is just to help it seal up a little bit better. Normally you don't need to do that, and I didn't do that before. But considering that I'm reusing the gaskets, it's just a measure to keep anything from leaking. It's really not going to make a whole lot of difference, but it just makes me feel better. So we'll go ahead and get the intake installed. Now the hardest part about this is when you do something like I just did and you drop the sensor into the silicone. Not a big deal. You can fix that. Just kind of a pain in the butt. These things happen though. Not a perfect system. I just need to clean it up. Now the silicone that I just dropped it into seals the end rails, the China rails. Quite a bit of excess there anyway, so it's not like it's, you know, really affecting anything. It'll squeeze out the excess, and I just wipe that off. I just didn't have the plug out of the way, and it kind of got in the way, and I set it down on there. But I already got that addressed. We got, looks like the bowl holes lined up. We just need to make sure the ports are lined up properly here. One nice thing about this MBE combination is when Matt sets this stuff up, they're meticulous. They don't leave any stone unturned, so to speak, and they make sure everything is dead nuts where it needs to be. So if you look down the intake runners, they're a perfect match to these heads. This was all built as an assembly. So Matt got the heads done, he sent them off to HRE, who did the intake. Once HRE got done with the intake, they used the heads, my deck height and everything to model it. They got it all put back together. So now I've got it set on there. The only thing I need to do is get all the bolts in, get them torqued down, and the intake will be in place, and then we can start putting stuff back on the intake. So I'm going to go ahead, take another break right here, get the bolts in, get them all torqued down, and I'll see you again in a bit. Alright, got the intake on, got all the bolts torqued down, got my water lines in place. Now the one thing on this, I'm going to kind of show you this a little bit. When I ordered this intake, there's a little bit of a goof on the communication, not a big deal. I wanted a water crossover and it didn't get made with one. Once these intakes are made, you can't really put a water crossover on them. So you kind of got to deal with what you got. And what I did is I found a spacer that had bungs in it, the appropriate ones that I needed, and I went ahead and sealed that to the intake. I cut out a provision for my thermostat because I do run a thermostat on this, and I made a provision to bolt my water neck onto here. And then all I did was take a couple of AN lines, some fittings, and made my own little water path. It works. It's kind of hokey, but it works. Now I got to get my distributor drop down in here. Or not distributor, actually it's my cam sync sensor. And the thing about it, is it doesn't really matter how it's dropped down in there. simply because once everything's all set up, it's going to need to be phased anyway to the crankshaft, and the only way that I can do that is when there's power to it. So what we do, go ahead and we'll drop it in. I'll put my clamp in. So that's in place. Let's see if I can get it in here. No, we'll have to put the screw in, put the clamp in. But let's put the clamp in place. Hopefully we won't have to turn it too awful much. If we do, we'll just have to move the clamp over a little bit, which isn't a big deal. We'll just adjust accordingly. But hopefully we can get it in this range where the clamp works. And if not, we just pull it out and we re-index it. That's one thing about running a distributorless ignition, is there's some peculiars on it that you got to deal with. One of the biggest ones is, again, locating the distributor, or the cam sync sensor, because once it's in there, that's what your cam references off of, the cam sync references off of, and that needs to be in a very specific location. Now for this setup, they say between 20 and 40 degrees before top dead center, or 20 to 40 degrees before your timing, so the computer can see it. So I've got it in there. If I got to move it, I move it. If I got to move the clamp to get it where I need to move it, I'll move the clamp. It's not a big deal. So anyway, we got that in there, and that's taken care of. We got this guy on here. We'll put the valve covers on just to keep the dirt and stuff out of it. Because one of the big things about this is before I put it back in the car, we're going to fill this thing up full of oil and we're going to prime it. I need to make sure I'm getting oil to all of the rocker arms before it goes back in the car. And it's a lot easier to do on the stand. Now the nice thing about it is with the dry sump, it's really easy. I just take the belt off the pump and go ahead and spin it with a drill. I've got an adapter that the drill goes on, and it makes it real easy, real convenient, and I can just sit there. I can rotate the engine over to one side, spin the oil pump, watch the oil, and once I've done that side, put the valve cover on, roll it back over to the other side and do the same thing. The reason I roll it over to the side is so it doesn't drain oil all over the floor, because it does move quite a bit of oil. Not a big deal. It's just if I leave it like it is right here and do it with the valve covers off, it makes a pretty big mess because it doesn't drain back fast enough to clear the valve covers. So, but that's what we're going to do there. That'll come probably here in a little while. I got to get new oil for this thing. Right now, we're just going to finish this up and close her up, and we'll call it good. So again, like, subscribe, share, and let's grow this channel. And thanks for watching.